Okay, class, moving on to the second component of program design. We're going to start talking about the lower body training program. We want to look at identifying the proper motion and mechanics of the lower body, classify exercises into subcategories and groups, understand and demonstrate the importance of posterior chain and single leg training. Also, just like before, we need to know how to properly progress and regress movements based on injury, subject's training age, and frequency of exercises. So with lower body exercise, it's a little different than upper body in the sense that it can stimulate greater amounts of hormonal response. This being that more muscles are engaged when it comes to lower body exercises. Bigger muscle groups, more muscles being utilized to stabilize the whole torso, especially with squat, deadlifts, and power Olympic lift type exercises. A lot of the lower body exercises can really have significant impact on performance and reducing the likelihood of injury. The reason being, everything done in sport is from the ground up, and the legs is what generates all the force and power whenever we execute a movement. But it's being able to harness that power and control it, which will be a very major big player when it comes to free movement or in sport and reducing likelihood of injury. So again, just to recap, kinetic chain, we have the closed and open. In this case, with the lower body, when we talk about the terminal joints, it would be more the ankle. So a closed kinetic chain would be feet fixed to the floor for the squat, a deadlift, or like when we said with the upper body, the push-up, similar things. It's it's the foot in contact with the floor to a fixed object. And remember, with a kinetic chain, it's the collective effort of two or more sequential joints working together to create movement. Open kinetic chain, be like extension, or in some cases, or in most cases, running, when the foot that's up, no longer in contact with the ground, is free to move every which way. The ankle can do circles, side to side, invert, pronate, all that fun jazz. With the upper body, it is possible to have, and same with the upper body, but it is possible to have both open and closed kinetic chains during one single movement. This is in the sense of running and sprinting. One foot's in contact with the ground, locked and fixed. The other one's up in the air, free to move about anywhere it comes. It's having the open chain is where injuries can occur if not done right in sport because, external forces and then stepping back down in the wrong spot causing injury. So with training, there are hip dominant and knee dominant movements. Hip dominant movements rely primarily on the hinging, a little bit more glute activation, hamstring, and lower back. This is focusing on hip extension, so bigger muscles to drive that weight up. Then you have knee dominant movement patterns. This is mainly on knee flexion and extension. So especially in the squat, knees going 90 degrees, getting that butt down parallel to the ground. This stresses a little bit more of the anterior chain, the quadriceps, and hip flexors. So, hip dominant exercises stress the posterior chain, knee dominant stress the anterior chain. It's probably a good fact to know. Hint, hint. When it comes to lower body training, it's better to do, especially for athletes, to do less machines and more free weight type exercises because in sport, when are we ever working in a single plane? And that's what machines tend to do. So a few examples of lower body exercise would be Romanian deadlift, straight leg deadlift, whichever you want to call it. So this is getting a little bit glute, lower back, hamstring activation. This is causing a stretch of the hamstrings, and the weights are helping with that pull. So this is a little bit of the muscles contracting while being elongated. This can help improve range of motion and flexibility. Also, especially in sport, this is a great exercise to do because when we decelerate and then change directions, the glutes and hamstrings are firing like crazy to slow the body down. If these are the muscles that are decelerating the body, they have to be strong enough to handle any power the quadriceps have generated to propel you down the field. Next, we have the deadlifts. Station it basically from the floor, come up. Here you need to have good range of motion, good hip mobility. Keeping a nice flat back, good firing, good coordination. Firing all the way up, hips come through, nice straight vertical torso. Then we have the squat. This is always the biggest challenge for most athletes, especially beginners. So right here, it's not a major issue, but with the squat, technique is key. The slightest thing can throw you off. If this man's elbows were just slightly further back, this would cause his chest to drop. But as you see, he's trying to keep his elbows forward to keep that chest up, getting nice depth, legs parallel to the ground. So movers and stabilizers. So with the hip, the primary mover, the big dog of everything is the glute. This is what fires the hardest and is key for extending the hip in the squat, the deadlift. The muscles that assist in the lift are your bicep femoris, basically semitendinous and semimembranous muscles, hamstrings, and abductor magnus, more the groin. And in the knee, you have the vastus lateralis, intermedius, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, and rectus femoris, all 4 muscles of the quads firing. And then also in the big squat, deadlift, you have the other muscles that are stabilizing the trunk. All right, rectus spinae, the lats, the traps, rhomboids, obliques, and abdominals. So here it is. If you just break this big muscular guy down, everything in red is what's firing. Even up here, though these aren't red, I don't know why, but it's up here too. That's firing to hold the bar and keep everything in alignment. So as you can see, full body exercise, a lot more muscles are engaged, recruited upon. Same thing in sport. Everything has to work as one. All right. So that's why it's very key to do these core lifts like the squat, the bent, the deadlift, the clean, explosive lifts, because more muscle recruitment for the movement is going to carry over much better to sport. Knee dominant. So most of the flexions occurring at the knee. So the primary movers of the knee for knee extension will be the vastus lateralis, medialis, intermedius, and then the rectus femoris for extension. So when the knee is still being engaged and being used in the squat, but then we can also isolate the movements with the machines to increase the strength of the knee joint and the muscles around it. But as you can see, whether it's a squat or running, all muscles are being utilized, but it's just which are the more taking on the greater load. So a lot of athletes tend to favor their knees, put a lot more pressure on the toes, which puts a lot more strain on the knees. This is one of the things we have to drill more and more with athletes, is getting them to be a little bit more hip dominant. Because the hips, the glutes, bigger muscles can take on bigger loads, bigger stresses. Being able to decelerate, cut, change direction, turn. All the power is generated from the hips. You're much stronger with bigger muscles than you are with just utilizing smaller muscles at once. Everything operates in a whole. The stronger you can get the glutes, the stronger you can get the quads, the stronger you get the hamstrings with maintaining proper balance, the likelihood of injury is greatly reduced. Injury always happens because such is life. Again, strengthening the glutes is one thing, but now working on the muscles that assist in those movements around, like the knee, the quads, the hamstrings, and can further improve acceleration, cutting, planting, pushing, jumping. Everything works together. Doing isolated exercises is great, but now getting them to work together is what's key when it comes to designing an effective program. It's best to do the large muscle movements, the more complex movements early on in the program. But when you want to isolate at the knee joint or just the hip itself, like glute, rear leg raise or leg extension, those are better to do at the end. Now it's not going to require as much firing and coordination. You can isolate the one movement, one joint, and really tax the body to its breaking point. So what are some of the exercises we can do? So for pushing, you can change intensity not just by weight, but by changing the ground contact. So you can have 2 feet single or 1 foot on the ground. Squatting for instance. So we go squat, we got a nice athletic base, feet hip width apart, going down. Another way to make that a little bit more challenging and challenge different motor groups and different firing patterns is changing the base of support, making it a little bit narrower. So doing a lunge or step up or split squat. These are your more primary pushing exercises. Pulling, same thing. You can do from a double or single. We have the RDL. Deadlift, people think is a pulling exercise, but really what you're doing, you're also pushing through the floor, so we would categorize a deadlift as a push exercise right here. But for pulling, bending, staying, with the hip dominant type exercises, double, single leg, you can do this with bent or straight leg. So what I'm getting at is, say we're doing hip lift, Legs are bent. You're going to get a little bit more glute activation. Legs are further away from the body, straighter out. Still doing a straight-legged hip lift let's say. Now you're going to get a little bit more hamstring activation. Okay? Taking a step back, double leg hip lift is going to be significantly easier than a single leg hip lift. Then doing the movements the same way. So making it harder by taking away one base of support as opposed to just always increasing the load. The more instability you have while performing a lift and you challenge it is going to recruit more muscle fibers, improve the efficiency of the motor unit recruitment. So there's more than one way to challenge an athlete other than just by loading up the bar on their back or in their hands. Changing the base of support, changing the angle of support or stability that they're standing on, or what the stability is underneath them, can greatly have an impact in gains made in the weight room. So, just to recap, while keeping a balanced program, we have to have pushes. And then with push, you need to have a pull. So whenever you do double with the knee dominant or knee dominant exercises, you want to do double with the hip dominant. So knee is going to activate more of the anterior portion. Hip dominant going to be a little bit more posterior. So front and back. Two front, two back, same thing. See how it is a balance? We're trying to keep everything in alignment. So we have the squat, would be the pushing exercise. RDL, be the counter movement to target the hamstrings more. So squat's going to hit more of the quads and the glutes. RDL is going to hit more of the glutes, but also hit a lot more of the hamstrings. This will help with stabilizing of the knee and improving movement efficiency and economy and reducing the likelihood of injury. Now you don't have to do it in this way. If you do two-legged base of support, you can go to a single leg base of support. But again, you have to design a program to allow the athletes to progress gradually over time. You just don't want to hit them with this if their balance is off from the start and they don't understand the movement. Gradually progressing the movement will make it challenging day in, day out, but also keep them from getting stagnant and bored with the exercises themselves. Traditionally with hip dominant exercises, there's a slight forward lean in the torso. There just has to be because it helps with the balancing aspect of the movement. Most athletes tend to be knee dominant, and they always strive to perform more. We have to strive to perform more hip dominant exercises with them. They don't understand this, and that's why it is our job as a coach to reinforce the importance of utilizing all the hip drive that we can in the motion, sinking the hips back in the squat, getting the butt down low. For some reason, the athletes just want to use their knees, but they don't understand there's just more tension and stress being placed on the knees that they can't handle. Focusing on the eccentric component of muscle action will cause more soreness or delayed onset muscle soreness. This is because of the micro tears that occur in the body. Now, the benefit, especially in these complex movements like the squat, for instance, doing eccentric movements allows you to better educate the athlete in the proper movement pattern of the exercise. You have to walk before you can run, and if you do it slow in the beginning, there will be less trouble trying to correct these improper mechanics that they have early on. Usually higher volume is done for the hip dominant type exercises. Knees just can't handle it. It'll wear them out over time. So if you're going to do high loads, more volume, make sure it's an exercise that's more utilizing glute, posterior chain. So just to give you an example, you'd probably want to do 4 to 5, maybe 6 sets of squat, but you probably wouldn't want to do more than 3 to 4 reps of leg extension. Just you don't want to tax the one joint too much because then you can barely walk and it just puts a lot of stress on that joint. It's not as big and as powerful. So more hip dominant movements. We got bent leg and straight leg variations. So we got the hip lift and curl variations right here on the left. So hip lift we can do with the med ball, barbell, sitting on the hips, stability ball, feet up on the ball, TRX, feet in the TRXs, and feet up on a box. These with all the legs bent. So this is going to be a little bit more glute activation, butt firing. Then we have the valve slide, those little sliding discs that you see that you can put under like chairs or desks to move furniture. Same concept. It's like these sliding discs that go under the feet. You have the stability ball. Same again, TRX leg curls. So extending out, pulling back in. Now you're using basically the body weight itself, no external load. This is a little bit better for an athlete because now they're having to engage the core, their trunk, and not just work the knee or the hip. Partner glute hamstring raise. Here's another way to hit the hamstrings and glutes. Kneeling down on the ground, someone holds the ankles. You lower your body down, stand in a straight line. Chest comes all the way down to the floor. Then you pull back up, do it again. Then, of course, to make these exercises harder, we can always go to a single leg variation. Probably won't be able to do that with partner glute ham raise unless you're Superman. But other than that, everything else can be done with a single leg variation. So, RDLs, straight-legged. You do it with a barbell, dumbbell, kettlebell. Do it on a single leg. Make it a little more difficult again. Everything's the same. So there's just variations, progress accordingly, but you got to base this off of your athlete's training age. Back extension. So again, working the posterior chain, working on the hip extension coming through, just like on the clean. You can do pull-throughs, kettlebell swings, same things. Single leg options. Balance. Incorporate. The more variations you can incorporate into an athlete's program, the stronger they'll get. But again, more the single leg and advanced moves will be for those who've been training for years. That's nothing you can do right off the bat. You have to gradually get them up there, because then if you have them advancing too soon, too fast, they're going to develop improper movement patterns and can lead to disruption, asymmetries, and injury down the road. What about the deadlift? Well, as I said, it is a pushing exercise, not a pulling exercise. It's one of the most complex forms of exercise that we can do that's not an Olympic lift. Mainly from the standpoint of so much is involved in the firing or the execution of this lift. You got your hamstrings, you got your quads, you got your glutes, you got your lower back, your upper back, everything coming into play. Even plantar flexion, driving off the toes a little bit, keeping that weight back. It's driving through the heels that's key in making something a hip or knee dominant exercise. So, knee dominant exercises. Traditionally, we want to keep a vertical torso in the squat or parallel to a parallel shin angle. So what that means is the angle of the shin, the knees going out towards the toes, and the back should be in the same alignment. So if these are my shins, I'm at like a nice, let's say hypothetically 45-degree angle here. My back should be at the same angle as my shin. The things we need to watch out for when in the squat, prevent it from becoming a movement that's going to be taxing more of the knees, is where the weight is on the athlete's feet. For this, we want to keep the weight back from the balls of your feet to your heels. This will make it a more hip-dominant exercise, which is better for a sense of the squat or deadlift, because the hips can handle a greater amount of load than the knees. Stressing the joints on the knees is bad because that can lead to injury, as we know, and lead to weaknesses and more likelihood of a blowout on the field. Training should not increase injury or soreness in joints, only in muscles. One of the common things we normally see with someone with poor posterior glute or muscle activation is a valgus knee collapse, knees going in. This tends to be more common in female athletes because they're so quad dominant, especially in soccer athletes. Watch them run, watch them stand, watch them jump and land. If you see the knees coming in, there's a good sense that it's not because they're weak in their hamstrings. It could be because their quads are just stronger than the hamstrings. So this movement pattern needs to be corrected. And a lot of it can stem from the ground up. So when training and watching an athlete move, watch from the ground up. Is their weight shifting forward? Okay, no, their weight's still on their heels, but now their knees are going in. Okay, that means we're probably going to have to work a little bit more on getting some posterior chain strength training in. Knees need to be about hip width apart, not inside the hips or going out too wide. This is actually kind of an in-between. This is maybe slightly wider than I would like, but still, going out is better than going in. Heels need to stay down and making sure we're getting adequate depth. Now, if you find the athlete's trying to squat and they get down to, say, 3/4 of the way down, they're still in good form, but now, once they go below that, they start shifting their way forward. All right, this could be a mobility issue or just a confidence thing, so we got to gradually work up to that. This is where eccentric muscle actions to an isometric hold could help, getting them to learn how to be in the proper position as they squat down. So, keeping things from becoming too knee dominant in the squat variation, let's say, you can use a TRX to hold so they forces them to sit back, squatting down to a box, teaching them to sit down to a chair. When you shift the weight back, you're going to have to find a counterbalance. So this is where the chest will drop slightly, with a slight forward lean. If the back can maintain the same angle as the shins, you're going to be pretty good. If a person struggles with squatting with the weight on their back, don't do it on the back. The biggest thing you want to work on is getting that hip mobility back, getting them down so the weight's not on the knee, it's mostly on the weight, on the hips, because that can handle the greatest amount of load. So variations to a squat or working up to a squat, you'll use a TRX to have them hold on to, squat down, that keeps them balanced, and they start to feel where their body, the movement should be. And then you can eventually progress to a box squat. Now they're standing about a foot away, reaching their butt back, lightly tapping the box, coming back up. Landmine squat, this is using a barbell fixed to the floor. That's kind of like a counterbalance, a little like pendulum sort of swing. Goblet squat is a good way to progress to doing the front squat and then to the back squat. Goblet squat is basically holding a dumbbell underneath your chin, long way, so holding the bell end right underneath your chin. We'll go over this during the practical component of the course in week 3 and 4. Holding the dumbbell underneath your chin is pretty good because as you go down, if the athlete feels they're falling back, you can always pull the weight away from your body to allow you to get to adequate depth. All right. Then in worst case scenarios when you can't get them to squat right, their balance is just not there, or maybe they're just coming out of rehab, using a machine might be the only way to do it. So leg press, simply put. So the key thing here is we want to not always stress the knees. We want to make sure the exercise we're doing that are hip dominant movement don't transition over to knee dominant. So that's the biggest thing we have to do. So that's why it's very important to find ways to progress and regress movements accordingly. So using external sources to help you get into the proper position before you get to, let's say, the back squat. So other ways to advance and challenge the athlete, going from a double to single leg. So stepping up, less of a base of support. This might be better than doing the double leg variation of a squat. This is allowing hip mobility, greater range of motion, but giving the athlete a better plane to work in, not as locked in with the 2 feet being fixed. So single leg can make it more challenging, but it can also allow movement and better performance and execution by the athlete and allow the proper firing and recruitment of muscle fibers. I'll get more into this in person. It's kind of hard to do it over a PowerPoint, but I just want to give you kind of a basic idea. So let's just simply put it, say back squat, athlete's pretty good with doing the box squat or back squat. We want to change variation so we're not always loading them up too much. Now we go into a split squat variation. Now the base of support is now narrowed, so now more balance has to come into play. All right, this is going to cause more recruitment of different muscle fibers that haven't been used before, which will only assist and aid in squatting technique. If you also look, I have this set up in a certain way. So we have step up, split squat, lunge, and then single leg squat. Top to bottom is also the regression of how we would advance these lifts. So step up, stepping up onto a box, so they're getting used to pushing off one leg. Now we have 2 feet on support on the ground, but now we're in alignment. Narrow base of support, a little less stability. Now we're stepping into that base of stability from the lunge position. Now we raise the back foot up off the ground. Now we're performing a single leg squat, or the foot's out in front like a pistol squat. Squat progression. So let's just get right into that. So you need a person to squat. They've never done it before. Keep it controlled. We're going to work on just the movement aspect, going down and up. So we can have a TRX or band to assist with the body weight, the body going down to a box, let's say. You're setting the end range of motion, but you're getting an external source to help with them get down there. Now you take out the external stimulus or the base of support line. Now you want to make sure they can adequately get down to proper depth on their own. So this is where they're strictly just using their body weight, squatting down to a box. Try to use the coaching cue as sitting your butt back, sitting on a chair, keeping the weight back on the heels. As coaching, you want to keep yourself in a position where you can see them from the front and the side, watching for knees collapsing in, weight shifting to the toes, trunk dropping down too far. Then the next progression would be body weight squat, no box. So you've already established the depth and try to help them get them into proper body positioning. Now you're taking away the marker or the trigger that's going to tell them when to stop to come back up. All right, once they've kind of activated this and got this down, now it's time to add some external stimulus. So this can be done a variety of different ways. We got landmine, goblet, front, and back. It's always good to work from front to back. All right. So the landmine squat is basically a barbell is fixed to the floor, but it can pivot up and down, rotate. So there's weight to it, but now it's not free weight where you can fall back and you move through all the planes of motion. From there, we go to a goblet squat. Now we're adding an external load, but now it's just totally under the power and control of the athlete. There's nothing locking it in. It's all on you. Now we go to the front squat and then to the back squat. The front squat, I feel, is a very good exercise, especially for athletes, because it's keeping the load in front. So it's helping you keep that more upright torso. Also, it's going to require a little bit more activation of the trunk, especially in the front, contracting the abdominal region, keeping you up nice and tall, keeping you honest. The back squat's more of a challenge because unless you have the good mobility, especially in the shoulders, you can see a tendency for the chest to drop as opposed to hips to go down to get adequate depth in the squat. So this is going to be what we call or classify in this class as a squat progression. Phase 1, you'll use TRX or band to assist the individual down to a box. Then you'll do body weight squat to a box, then take away the box, then start adding external load. And we want to work from front to back. So progressing or regressing movements, like we say, it needs to be paced out. So red flags for regressions: depth. If an athlete isn't getting deep enough in the squat, we either have to change something. Usually not adding more weight is not going to help them get lower. You have to lighten the load or change where they're holding the weight. So say an athlete's having trouble with the back squat, can't get down, maybe we just have to shift the bar to the front. Our front squat might be a little better. That's still not working. We have to lighten the load. Help educate their body, get them back to doing the proper weight. You can also see too when we're maxing out, let's say in the squat, you'll see it. Squatting heavy weight, you tend not to go as deep into the pocket as you would with lighter weight. So if you're doing 100 pounds is like a warm-up set, and 300 pounds is your max set, you might be slightly higher in that set than you are on the first. So lighten the weight to make sure you're working through the full range of motion. The other big issue you need to be careful of is the valgus knee collapse, knees going in. Now, to prevent this from happening, we like to feed the issue, they say. Putting a small band around the knees, which will force the bands to come in, makes you work against the band. So when the bands are pulling the knees in, you're naturally going to want to work against the band to keep the knees out. So if lightening the weight still doesn't correct this, adding external load, an external stimulus like the bands around the knee can prevent the valgus knee collapse from happening because you're now going to work against that resistive force to correct it. Same thing, the knees can collapse basically based on where the weight is shifting to on the feet. If the weight stays back on the heels, you're going to have the knees more likely staying out. If the weight is shifting to the toes, the knees are going to collapse, and now you're putting a lot more stress on the knee itself. Adding a plate or raising the heels of the athlete during the squat will help them shift their weight back. So the trick here is sometimes when you see an issue arising, you don't have to work against it, feed it, work with it. If people are shifting onto the toes, put something under the heels because now they're going to feel more off balance. They're going to naturally want to sit their hips back. Elevating the heels only about an inch or two can really help this. Put a plate or a little piece of plywood under. Wear Timberlands, raising the heel, or platform shoes can help improve hip mobility. The reason being why you have the shift in the to the toes is ankle mobility is limited, tightness. So this is where foam rolling and pre and post rehabilitation or stretching is key, especially around the calves and the Achilles, because if you don't have proper ankle mobility, this can limit your range of motion. Everything works from the ground up. So excessive forward lean of torso, maybe just doing a band squat, forcing you to work against it, or just lightening the weight can help this too. There's many different ways, and experience will help regress movements as you go. The biggest thing I want you to take, if you see valgus collapse, knees coming in, you'll have to make sure the weight is on the right part of the feet. So on the squat, we got to make sure the weight is on the heels. Knees are still collapsing in even with the heels going back. Try incorporating a mini band around the knees. This is called feeding the issue. If you feed the issue, it's a good chance you might work against it and correct the problem. So the bands pull the knees in. You naturally want to work against the band, driving those knees out in the squat. Then, mobility of the hips. If they're limited, try not to load the bar because the weight's not going to help them get lower. If anything, it's going to limit them and throw everything else out of whack. Keeping the weight light, educating them through the proper range of motion is what's key in the beginning of training, especially educating the athlete in a brand new exercise that they've never done before, keeping it light and having them move properly. Common term you might hear is the butt wink. This is when we squat down too low and you start to see the butt kind of turn underneath the body. We don't want that. We want to keep a nice steady butt, nice steady back posture, because when that butt wink happens, it's a rounding of the lower back. We want to keep everything nice and rigid and nice and tight. So keeping the butt out, sitting the butt back, preventing this wink from happening is key. So if that happens, maybe we have to adjust the depth. So putting a box up or cadencing the athlete down to a certain level. Right? So why is it important to do some form of single leg activity? Well, most sport is done on single basis support. When you run, you cut, changing directions. Your athletes are mostly planning off of one leg. Same with throwing. You're pushing off one foot, landing onto another one. I'll get this article to you. I just got to find it, but it's on Mike Boyle. He talks about the importance of single leg training. If you can get an athlete stronger training on a single leg, it can greatly reduce the injury that occurs in sport. All right? You've also seen this in the weight room. Those guys who just do upper body and totally neglect the lower body. All right? You need to train the lower body. It doesn't matter how big you are on top. You're not running on your hands. You run on the legs. You need to train the lower body. Strengthening the hamstrings, the glutes, helps with decelerating and stabilizing the joints. This is sometimes rarely addressed in programs. Read T-Nation articles. This is sometimes what needs to be addressed in most articles. Is the T-Nation, though it's not the scientific side of things, it does address and talk about exercises and their benefits of posterior chain work. I'll get this to you. I'll put this on the file section of Canvas. So like I said earlier, the biggest problem we normally see is a lack of lower body training. Don't skip leg day. It's key, especially as an athlete. You need to stay balanced. This also doesn't look right. Yeah, he looks pretty impressive, but when he puts shorts on, it doesn't look as dominant. Definitely run away from this guy. Doesn't matter how big his arms are. If he's going to kill you and fight you, if he can't catch you, you're pretty much good. All right. Class, that is it. I'm going to put some articles up on the files for you to read on Canvas. Hope this was very informative and not too much I threw at you. Again, this will make more sense next week when we start doing more hands-on training in the weight room.